Hi, this is Jeff Heaton. In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up a Kaggle-in-Class competition. This is just like a normal Kaggle, except it's just to a smaller number of people. It's often used for professors to set up competitions in their class as part of an assignment. You might be interested in this even if you're not going to set up a Kaggle-in-Class of your own. It shows you some of the behind-the-scenes admin capabilities on the Kaggle platform, and this gives you a few insights into how Kaggle competitions are actually run. To see all my videos about Kaggle, neural networks, and other AI topics, click the subscribe button and the bell next to it and select all to be notified of every new video. Okay, before you get started, there are a couple of files that you should have set aside because you're going to need to put these files into your Kaggle project just as soon as you create it. First of all, there's two image files, and these image files are used to provide some project-specific artwork as your users are looking at the Kaggle competition. And these are the same sorts of files that seem to be present on actual Kaggles that companies are letting you compete for big money for. So this really shows you the underpinnings of how a Kaggle competition works. So first is what I call the square and the wide images. Let's look at the wide image first. It is 1900 pixels by 400, at least that's the recommended size. This is the one that I created. Now this Kaggle competition that I am going to be running for my students is a computer vision GAN sort of project. It is giving them images that they must classify. I want to know, do they have glasses on, or in this case, no glasses on, or glasses on? And it's not always the same person like you see here. They're a mixture of people with glasses, without glasses, that I generated using GANs. The exact technique that I did for this, you can see in another video that I have up. It's where I'm exploring the latent vector of a GAN. So that's the wide image. Now, one thing important about the wide image, don't put text on here to describe what this project is, because Kaggle is going to overlay some text for you. That was one of the first mistakes that I made. I had to regenerate the image. I was very unhappy and mildly frustrated. This is the square image. This is used more in listings where the user is browsing through a bunch of Kaggle competitions. This one, you do want to put some text in here just to describe it, kind of like a YouTube thumbnail. This is 400 by 400. Okay, those are really the only two image files that you have. We'll see where they pop into your project later. Essentially, the wide is for the banner above your project, and the square is for listings. Then you need to create some CSV files, and these are what really drives your project. You'll upload these into Kaggle, and Kaggle will provide these to your users. The solution file will be hidden and will stay behind the scenes. Nobody will see this one really ever, even after your project ends. Kaggle will reveal the final leaderboard, but it won't actually reveal the solutions unless you choose to upload that. Then there's the train and the test files. The train and the test files are used to be given to your users typically. So the train file is what the users will actually train their models on. This has the outcomes, or the targets. The test does not have the outcomes. It looks very similar to the train file, except it's different data. It's different data that you're training on, and then another set of data that you want the user to provide the outputs for those. So let me go ahead and open first the train. So this is the training file. It's important that you have some sort of an ID. This ID identifies each one of the rows. This ID is particularly important in the test file. And I don't know if it's a requirement, but I think it's good practice. I never have my IDs overlap between training and test. This shows truly that this is one big master data set that I had. I broke apart a big chunk of it for training, like 90% I think I chose. And then 10% or so of it I'm holding back as the test set that is revealed in the solution. So if you look at these IDs, and you can see that I start at 1, not necessarily a requirement, but it's how I do it. And if you go down to the end of all of these, you can see that right around 4500 is where it stops. So you'll see that my test set, when I open in a second, starts at 4501. It's just a big master set that I broke in half, or not in half, into pieces. And you need to generate these CSV files in however way you're doing it. You can use public data sets, but you have to be aware that for your Kaggle competition, if you use public data sets, the answers are out there. So your users can potentially cheat, so to speak, and have the correct answers, like the Titanic data set. The Titanic dataset is a somewhat famous Kaggle tutorial, and you can see it here. The data for this is public. It comes from the Titanic passengers. You're trying to predict if people lived or if they died on the Titanic. The problem here is the data, the answers are out there. The solution set is not revealed from Kaggle that I know of, but you can just go to Wikipedia and get a list of who lived and who died on the Titanic. And guess what? If you go to the leaderboard, look at all these people. They are the top Kagglers on the Titanic dataset. They're probably the top copy and pasters on the Titanic dataset. They just went out and got the answers. Look at this guy, nailed it in one shot. I don't know why it took that guy 13 tries to copy and paste it, but that is the problem that you run into when you're designing a dataset for Kaggle. This is what takes me the longest to set up datasets for my students. I create new original data each time. And there's several challenges there. One is this data is generated in some way, shape, or form. So I have to balance that between creating a data set that is realistic for the students, that I can generate the data for, but doesn't have some hidden technique that I used to actually generate it, that the students can go do the same thing, and suddenly I have this. I've had one or two Kaggles in the past years do this, where literally, boom, everybody goes to 1.0, or at least a handful do. And I don't necessarily punish these students in any way, because, hey, they've reverse engineered the Kaggle, they've figured something out. So long as they didn't do something I specifically said was off the table, they're fine. Okay, so back to this. This is the training set. These columns that you have here are your inputs to whatever the model is. Often in Kaggle, these are redacted. So this is typically what you'll see in a Kaggle competition. They'll have things like V1, V2, V3. And what are they? Who knows? Because often this Kaggle data is business data that companies don't necessarily want to provide you with all the details on. There might also be personal information from people in these data sets. So they're often very redacted. But if you scroll through all of these columns, and I have 512 of them, and you get all the way over to the end, these are the targets. That's what you're training your model against so that it can form these predictions. In the case of my data set, this is just a Boolean. Does this person's image have glasses on or not? And you can see there's zeros and ones. It's very important that you shuffle the heck out of these data sets, because, especially on the solution. You don't want any sort of order implied in here that would leak this target to your data set. That's a very common problem in real Kaggles, where if you do actually pass the ID in, so that ID field that we had at the very, very beginning, if you pass this in as a predictor and you get lift, that's a problem. That means that there's something in this order that is communicating what the target is. Believe me, real Kagglers look for this all the time, and sometimes it's there. Shuffle your data for your users, and then put some sort of a order right on top of it with the IDs. The test dataset looks really very similar. Again, notice my IDs, same data. Now for this data, I will briefly explain what's going on here for this competition. This competition is predicting if images have glasses or not. These V's, that is the latent vectors. So these are like seeds that generate those GAN images, because all my images are computer generated. These 512 values are that vector that generated each of these images. So this is part of the competition too. The students can go after the images, or they can go after this latent vector, or both. I'm mostly interested in, is there anything in this latent vector that they can immediately use to tell if something very basic about the GAN has glasses or not. And then in this ID field, I will mention this as well, since I am providing supplemental data, and this is often done in Kaggles, like these images. I simply make sure that the images for the students, which are provided in a separate archive file, that the images line up to these IDs. So the images archive that I give them simply has these IDs embedded into it. You can see face 1, face 2, face 3. Those simply correspond to the ID. So if you open up the faces in the training set, the glasses or no glasses should correspond to the target. By the way, if you're interested in that particular Kaggle competition, you can see a video that I made for my class. I'll put a link in the bottom of the description where I review this Kaggle competition to the students ahead of them actually competing in it. And most importantly, in the test data, there is no target. This is what they're filling in. So they will form these predictions and fill out a file that they will submit. Okay, so that's submission. Let's look at the sample file. So this is the sample file. You'll notice it's much shorter. There are no V1, V2, V3 like we saw in the other one. That is because they're not really needed. You don't need to submit all of the data back to Kaggle so that your submission can be scored. All they really need is the ID and what your prediction was. Now this is a sample, so all the predictions are the same. I did sort of a majority case guess here. The number of people who have glasses in my data set, which you can calculate looking at the training set, is about 64%. So the most basic naive model is just going to say, okay, I know the ground truth is around 64%, so I am going to just guess that 64% probability is that the person had glasses. Now, one thing that's done in real Kaggles that is just particularly mean, and I'm not doing it in this competition, and there's no way that the students would know unless I told them, is sometimes this ground truth, so the percent, is different between the test and the train. So you could have a different balance, level of unbalance in your data, and that messes with the ground truth of the actual models. If in the training data, say this was 50-50, but in the test data, this was 64%, then that creates a balance that's different between your evaluation data and your training data, and there's several creative solutions that are used to combat that in Kaggle. It's beyond the scope of this video to talk about this, and I'm not doing this in this particular competition, so that's something else that is interesting that comes up in actual Kaggles. All right, let's look at the secret sauce, the super secret solution file. This is very important. So the solution file, you have the IDs and you have the actual answers. So these are the true answers to my solution. If you had this entire file, you could submit it and get a perfect 0 log loss on this competition. Now for this competition, there's only 1,000 or so images in the test data set. So one thing that the students could certainly do, and I am taking this off the table, is they could go through the entire data set and just self-label. It does not take that long to go through 1,000 images for a human being and mark glasses or no glasses. So you could quickly get that a perfect score on it, or at least sort of. There's mislabeled values in there, so you would not overcome the noise, but you would get close to a perfect score. So I'm telling the students ahead of time, you cannot do that. You cannot look through the images and hand label. Hand labeling is something I'm saying is off the table, is considered cheating for this assignment. In a real Kaggle, you've got to be very careful with what you define as cheating, because it's going to be very hard to validate that. The in-the-money solutions in a Kaggle are always hand validated by the judges because they're presented to the company that ran the Kaggle, but below those top solutions, there's all sorts of ways that you can cheat in a Kaggle, and we'll talk about a few of those as we go through. But in an actual Kaggle, what they often do is they will just have such a large test set that it's cumbersome to actually hand label anything, or they will put in very cleverly engineered junk data along with the real data in the test data set that just make it really, really hard to cheat in that way. Now, I will probably release this as my actual Kaggle is going on, so I'm sort of giving away the answers to around 45 of these if any of my students are watching this, so don't use these values. This is the same as hand labeling these. Don't give me any sort of solution where you're just hand coding the answer to this Kaggle. I want the machines to be giving the answers. So these are our files that we will use in the Kaggle competition. Okay, now that you've got the files that you need, you can go to Kaggle and you'll click on Compete. This shows you competitions going on currently, but what you're most interested in is clicking on the Hosted tab. Now this shows you competitions that you've hosted in the past. If you haven't hosted a competition, then you're not going to see anything here. But basically here we have all of the competitions that I've previously hosted. Just to show you kind of what that looks like, if you click on one of these, it will take you into the normal Kaggle interface for a active or inactive, in this case, competition. But what you have now is this host tab. And seeing some of the things that are available in this host tab might be useful to you even as a Kaggle competitor, because you get an idea of how Kaggle is actually working behind the scenes. If you click on that, you can see there's a variety of pages that we'll need to fill in. There's also information about the images that put in this up here. And we'll see more on that when we actually get to creating our own. But there's privacy, evaluation, and then sandbox submissions and all submissions. All submissions, this is a competition that was active a semester ago, and these are all the teams that were competing. So you can see how your competitors are doing, and you have immediate access to both the public and the private leaderboard. Even though the private leaderboard, which is what your competitors will ultimately be evaluated on, is not made available to entrants to actually see, you will be able to see that as the competition goes on, and you can get an idea of how badly your teams are overfitting. This is not usually announced as competitions go on. So let's go ahead and create a new Kaggle competition. Now I want my names to be consistent, so I'm taking a quick look here at what they were called, and then also the title. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy that so that I have it. Again, you won't be naming it the same thing that I did, and I will be also naming it something similar to that. So I'm going to go ahead and just open up another tab so that I have that information available. And I'm going to go to Kaggle-in-Class. Okay, when you go to this page, Kaggle.com, see About Host, this takes you to this page, and you can click Get Started. They do want to know what sort of competition you're going to launch. If you're a corporation and going to offer some serious money for this, then you need to fill out this form and talk to Kaggle. I've never been through that process before. If you want to use their Kaggle-in-Class, which is what we're doing, we'll click that. This gives you the ability to create a new competition. We'll click that. Now, one thing I want to point out here, this create a competition does not have a delete button. So if you create a competition and you put it on the URL, you've reserved that URL forever. You can email Kaggle and ask them to delete the competition for you, but that may or may not happen, and that may take some time. So be sure of what you're doing on this page. I think some of this you can edit before you publish the competition, but that I wouldn't guarantee. So for this, I'm going to copy and paste some of this from my other. Put that into there, except this is spring 2020 that I'm setting this up for. Short description. For this, I am using a computer vision. We're looking at images and trying to determine if they're wearing glasses or not. I like the generated URL that it gave me, so that is perfectly fine. So I am going to double check all of this, like it, I like it, I like it, spring 2020, and I will create my competition. All right, now we're in this page. It looks similar to those other competitions that I had. There's a number of things that you need to set up here. So let's go through these kind of one by one and get this competition configured to go. Now it's telling you this competition has not been launched. Only Kaggle hosts and Kaggle admins can see it. So even if you navigated to this URL, and this URL is what I will eventually give my students, you will not be able to see it unless you're a Kaggle employee or me, or I guess even a Kaggle admin. The description, this page you'll enter in Markdown. This will vary depending on what your competition is. If you go to the Host tab, you'll see that we have some options here. The images were not here before. These are the two images that I showed you earlier on our checklist of files to have ready, and we'll go ahead and upload those now, because that's pretty easy. Let's put in the wide file. You just navigate to the file and select it. Now, since I created the image exactly the size it wants, I don't have a lot of steps here. There's really no need to crop. But if you uploaded just some random image into there, then you would need to crop it to get it into that size. Preview is also pretty boring since I already set this up, but I will upload the image. And notice my background up here now changes to have the banner that I had from there. And this is why I told you too, don't put text into it, because Kaggle just kind of rudely dumps text right over top of your image. Now I'm going to do the square one. Similar process. You navigate to the file, upload it. Same previewing and cropping, not necessary since I made it be the right size. By the way, I created these images in GIMP. Photoshop works good too. So now my images are there. So this is starting to take shape. Let me go into settings. Most of this is already filled in or you can't change. This is the URL. I always copy and paste this early on so that I can quickly get back to here because this is not showing up yet. It can be easy to sort of lose track of that competition. Not really sure what organizations is for. I am not one of the organizations on here, so that doesn't matter to me too much. I am going to allow teams. Deadline, I'll fill in a second. Maximum daily submissions. So in a real Kaggle, this is one of the ways you can cheat. You create multiple accounts so that you can do a lot of submissions and try to figure out that private leaderboard that is so critical in Kaggle. We'll see what the private leaderboard is from behind the scenes in a moment here. But I usually set this pretty high. I want the students to be able to really hit this as many times as they want to. I'm not too afraid of them overfitting the leaderboard. And if they want to probe the leaderboard, figure out what the actual answers are, they can just go through and cheat by scanning the faces and human labeling. So human labeling is the only thing off the table in this Kaggle competition. I usually leave this at 2. This is the number of submissions that they've made that will be scored for the private leaderboard. In real Kaggles, this is typically 2 as well. So the deadline, this is just an arbitrary date that you pick. Since I'm running this for my class, I've already announced this to the students. You want to warn people that the deadline is in Greenwich Mean Time, so 4/13/2020. So you just move to that date, and you can put it there, 4/13/2020. I always make it at midnight. You could line this up to be midnight at your own time zone, but I like to make this mirror the real Kaggle as much as possible. So I'm going to save those changes. Takes a moment. Okay, Kaggle has saved those. Image is already done. Privacy, I always make these public, but you can do as you like. Hosts, I've never once had a host here, but I don't know, if I had a TA, maybe I would appoint them. Evaluation, this is very important. So you need to pick a scoring metric. Kaggle has a ton of scoring metrics, and there's even a way you can define your own scoring metric. I have never tried that. I've learned more about exotic scoring methods in Kaggle than any other place perhaps, because sometimes I wanted to compete in a Kaggle and I needed to learn what exactly that scoring method was. The main ones that you're going to deal with are log loss, if you have a classification. Even if you have a multi-class classification, you'll probably use a multi-log loss, or you will use RMSE if you're in regression. Most likely, these are probably the 2 most common ones, RMSE or log loss, but you can also use area under the curve. I could potentially use AUC for this one because it is a binary classifier, but I'm going to do log loss, so that will penalize to some degree overconfident but wrong guesses. By the way, I have an entire video on a number of the most popular error metrics, so that might be useful to you to look at. I'll put a link to that in the description as well. So now we need to provide the super secret solution file. Okay, solution file has been uploaded. If you lose a copy, you can always download it later. Notice it's already parsed it and is figuring out what my fields are. So I need to map these. The ID field is an ID, and glasses, that is the expected. The expected, the target, the Y, whatever you want to call it. Public leaderboard percentage. In the past, Kaggle's defaulted this, but you can set this whatever you want. I am going to make the public leaderboard be 70%. So what this means, this deals with how a Kaggle competition is scored. This is a diagram that I put together. It's part of my class about how a Kaggle is actually scored. So here is the original data set that you might send to Kaggle or prepare yourself as a company. You know all of the X's. Those are what you're predicting. You know all of the Y's. That is what the outcome is supposed to be. Then it gets split. And this is the public data that your users will download. These become your test. You don't provide the Y. You know it, but it's hidden. And you do provide the Y's for the training sets. So the training set is down here, train, test. Now the leaderboard that we'll see in a moment that Kaggle scores for you, there is the private. Some of these are held back. That's that percent that I was putting in. The percent defines the public leaderboard. The public leaderboard, that's that 70% that they're scored on, and they see their score as the competition proceeds. But at the end, to prevent overfitting, it flips, and you use the private leaderboard to score them. So 30% in my competition is going to be the private, 70% is going to be the public leaderboard. Just an arbitrary range that I picked. Usually the private leaderboard is smaller. The trick is the users, as the competition runs, don't know the sizes or makeup of each of these. The size is usually disclosed, I believe. I don't pay too much attention to that when I'm doing a real Kaggle because I'm not trying to overfit that leaderboard. I think sometimes they do disclose those, but if you want to post some experience to that in the comments, definitely do that. So that's that percentage. That's the public leaderboard percentage. I am going to set the mapping. Now that is set. The percentages are given here. Total better add up to 100%. Now they want a sample solution. I'm going to give them that. Again, I've done this a bunch of times, so I have everything ready to go ahead of time. When I was first doing this, I was just stumbling through building these files as it asked for them. So here's sample. We also need to map these and put a validator. So again, I'm going to map that. Glasses is the predicted. The validator, this can be a little bit tricky. You can do custom. I've not done that. I assume that's probably a regular expression. I'm going to say the ID is non-negative, and that the predicted value, definitely not integers between 0 and 1. Yeah, behavior prediction between 0 and 1. Not just literally the value 0 and 1, because there will be a number of values between there. So I'm going to set this. This does help to filter out bad data. It takes a moment for Kaggle to run through its processing on this. Oh, by the way, I remember from previous times that I've set this up, this is one that really likes to time out. Last semester, I thought this was just Kaggle having problems that day, but this one does seem to time out. So I am going to just ignore this and continue on to the next one. If this gets me in trouble, then I'll be editing out this part of the video and it won't matter. But I believe seeing this endlessly spin is not a bad thing. Probably a bug in Kaggle. We'll now go on to sand. Let's look at the launch checklist. It's a good point to look at that. You can see I'm getting most of my checkboxes filled in. You have not uploaded any data file. You have to upload a test, and you have still template in the description. We'll get to that in a moment. But this is for the sandbox submissions. You'll want to keep looking at this. Once you get all these green checks fixed, then you can launch your competition. Let's go to sandbox submissions. Actually, let's go back to evaluation briefly. Yeah, you can see that one completed. So that's a GUI issue in Kaggle. It's no longer spinning. We'll go to sandbox submissions. You've got to submit at least one of these. This lets it test. Now this sample, I'm going to set this as a benchmark. So that means it will show on the leaderboard along with the other solutions that the students are submitting. This is kind of a low water mark. If you are not beating my majority case submission, then your model's not good at all. I am going to give this a better name. Majority case. So that's what the students will actually see rather than just sample. Now I am going to submit one. I'm going to submit actually the sample itself just to test it. Okay, I've uploaded it. Kaggle will score it. Scored it complete. Should be the same. So now I've done at least one sample submission. You could submit the solution as well and see a perfect score there. I'm not going to do that. That would be somewhat redundant at this point, but if you can test your own. What this is good for is the competition is going. I sometimes will write some code that I want to give to the students to give hints on different features. If I want to test something and not have my score go and be on the leaderboard because I don't want to compete with the students, that's just a no-win situation. If I compete with my own students, either I'm going to score completely better than them and people will criticize me because, oh my gosh, the professor's beating up on his own students, or I will score worse than them and people will be like, why is he teaching this class? How much do they pay this guy? So this is no-win situation. So this lets you be able to compete in your own Kaggle competition without it being on the leaderboard for the people in the competition to look at and wonder about. All submissions, nobody submitted anything yet. And if you look at your leaderboard, the only thing that is up there, and they did not use my display name, so I'm not sure what's going on there, but that's fine. Sample.csv, this is essentially the benchmark that I've set up. So this will be hopefully the low water mark, although always some submissions will go below it. Let me go back to host, and my checklist should be... Okay, so I still need to upload data. Let's do that. I'm not going to drag you through me updating all the content for that. I'll show what it is, but it's you just have to type instructions and other things for your users. If I go to data, I can start to upload data. So what I'm going to upload here is the first version. You can also zip large files. This is where we put in our train. There it's uploading, and it's not that big. If this is big, definitely zip it. For my version notes, this is initial. If I've screwed up anything, then I'll cut that part and you'll be noticing that I'm putting in something like initial-2. Let's just see if my first version actually works. Might be the first semester ever. Then I'm going to upload more files. I am going to also upload the test. And in Kaggle, usually these are very simple names, train and test. Now you can revise these as the competition is going on. Not suggested, but if there's critical errors with your data, you can upload and fix that. As the competition is going on, you need to have your people resubmit, and that creates a little frustration, I would imagine. So I'm going to create. They're processing my data. This doesn't usually take too long, but I will skip through this. Oh, it's done already. Success. Love the big green checkbox. Makes me feel like I've accomplished something. Okay, preview down here is showing you, it shows you all these columns. It's going to show you distributions and other things on it. You can go in and fill in more information on these, like ID. I can fill in what that value actually is. So like about that field, I can say the ID, I don't know, it's the ID. I always hate really unuseful descriptions like that. Field name ID, what is it? It's the ID. All of these other values, I am not going to go through there and literally put in every single one of those. They're just the latent vector for my GAN. But if these were actual real values, I do sometimes go in and put the values in there just to show to the students. Now this is kind of interesting. I have to agree, you always have to agree to the Kaggle competition before the data is shown to you. And when you agree, then that blurred area becomes clear. This is actually kind of interesting. You can see the latent vector. They're all pretty well normal distributions. The distributions of these I don't think will be that useful in this competition because they're again latent vectors. And there we have it. It is now uploaded and ready to go. If we go back to host and we look at my launch checklist, all I have to do is now get rid of template text. Everything else is ready for launch. So look at the overview. This is the homepage of your competition so I need to put in data or text here. I'm a data scientist. Everything's data, text, whatever. Books are full of data. Art in a museum is data. So I'll click edit. You go into a little editor and you can go through that. I'm going to fast forward all this work that I have to go through to put in descriptions and data describing this project for the students. I'll show you this when it's complete. Okay, I went ahead and added the data. You can see here I added a basic description of it. I might fill that out a little bit more, but that's not important to launching the competition. I describe here basically where the data is. I note that you can download it from this location. So you can download the images. Since the images are coming from outside of Kaggle and you can't really upload them here, I give a link and I have those hosted in data.heatonresearch.com, which is basically an Amazon S3 bucket. And that's pretty much it. If you go to host and launch checklist, I'm good to go. I could set a future launch date or I could launch the competition now. I'm not going to launch it just yet because I like to have this up and ready before the class actually reaches this point. But we're good to go at this point. Thank you for watching this video, and if you're interested in things related to Kaggle, machine learning, deep learning, and other things, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and like this video. Thank you very much.